All right. Good morning, everyone. Just do a quick sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you all right. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good morning, guests of honor, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. With apologies, I cannot be here in Hong Kong, but I really want to thank our host, Chinachem Group, as well as the Hong Kong Green Building Council for organizing this wonderful event. It's really very exciting to see how you embrace the net zero, and I'm quite sure that Hong Kong is going to be a shining example in this. Uh, I was part of the team in World Green Building Council to launch the Advancing Net Zero campaign in 2017. And I really feel passionate that it is not something that we could just say and just do it. We have to plan, we have to design a way forward. And therefore my title, Design a Net Zero World, a Roadmap to Net Zero. So I'm going to cover these few things. Again, some of it not entirely new to you, but I think it's good to just remind ourselves why net zero. But the more important part I want to just touch on would be some of the thinking about net zero processes, net zero environment, net zero behavior. I'm quite sure you resonate with that. People is central to this. And lastly, the roadmap to net zero. Why net zero? It may sound like a repetition of all the argument for net zero, but we need to take a look at the current situation of the world today and ask ourselves what are our priorities for tomorrow. And we think about net zero as some kind of magic formula, equation. And lastly, is net zero even possible? So this is not new to you. I'm quite sure you go to Google, climate change, net zero, sustainability, you see this rhetoric all the time about the temperature rising, and not surprising that 2021 was one of the hottest year on record. A lot of us live in very comfortable environment, like great cities like Hong Kong, like Singapore, and we don't always look around us in situations that are far less fortunate than we have. So I had the honor as well as some of the difficult times of traveling to places that we don't normally go to in South America and Africa during my term as World Green Building Chairman. I don't always see all these things of the pictures on the right, but I do see some of these. And it is not really an even world today that we're looking at. So we need to remind ourselves in our comfort zone in Hong Kong or in Singapore, the situation is not as good as it always seems. I share with you an interesting experience that I had. I had a dream last night, I'm not joking. I dreamt that I was in a building, and building engineers will resonate with this, in an office environment, that I was closest to a point that I suddenly saw the wall cracked. And not talking about hairline crack, but talking about structural cracks. So in the dream, I shouted at the people around me. I said, please get out of this building quickly. And people closest to the cracks left immediately. And I turn around and I see still a large group of people behind me, further away from the cracks. I started to shout at them. I said, the building is in danger of collapsing, maybe, so quickly leave. And they move very slowly, and I get impatient and started to raise my voice. And I look across the space. I saw someone coming to work, totally oblivious to what's happening, despite the kind of tremor that we're feeling in the building. So I shouted at some words I shouldn't describe in this conference at that person. And the person shouted back at me and said, how can you say that to me? I think this is a strange dream, but I share with you is that the world of sustainability is like this. The closer you are to some of the things you see, you act on it quickly. But the further away, we tend to take our time. And some, even though read about these things every day, do nothing and continue as business as usual. So I hope you remember this dream and help us to remember that we act fast. Tomorrow's priorities are quite a difficult one because issue of urbanization and consumption continue to challenge the net zero movement. We need to ask ourselves, is over-urbanization, over-consumption being managed today? If not, how can we do that? And if you are a sustainability responsible organization, you do reporting, I hope that you go all the way to look at scope 1, 2, and 3 and tackle not just your own problem, but everyone else that need to work with us in sync. In terms of prevention, there are issues that go beyond just urbanization and consumption. The issues of rising seawater challenge that people pay very little attention to. Hong Kong, like Singapore, we are surrounded by sea. We can't hide away from this, and we need to look at it at some point in time, maybe quite soon than later. Issue of food, again, the problem of supply chain. We saw that during COVID. Again, in cities like Singapore and Hong Kong, we are not self-sufficient enough in terms of food. We have high population. So how do we even help solve this problem? So these are the priorities I think we have to tackle. The net zero equation, it looks simple. It's about reduction, elimination, emissions, but that just merely try to neutralize the current production. We haven't talked about the greater issue of how to reduce significantly beyond just elimination. So there are challenges, needless to say, but I think one of the greatest things that we need to work on quickly is increasing the knowledge on net zero. Because unless people have knowledge, they really don't know how to tackle it, and they are totally not aware, just like what my dream showed earlier on. So we need to spread the message. We need to teach people. And I would say that the recent COVID, though it brought a lot of sadness, a lot of challenges and unhappiness to the whole world, I think if you look at the bright side, the silver lining on the cloud is that we suddenly saw a drop in emissions. I'm not a reductionist. I don't advocate that. But I think to me, instead of looking at COVID that bring tragedy, I see a glimpse of hope of how we might just be able to tackle it. We need to tackle some of the fundamental systemic issues, I think particularly in high population centers. So I'm going to suggest some practical ways of how we rethink this. I'm going to cover the processes, the environment, as well as organization. I think the last one would be most interesting. The processes are not new to everyone in this conference room. We need to tackle social, economic, environment, sustainability, the triple bottom line. We need to now think of circularity as how we start and how we end. And a lot of us were very quick to jump to action. We love actions. We love to say, hey, let's do something about sustainability. But also, I suggest that we be a bit more systematic. Being advisors to no less than 4 major organizations here in Singapore on sustainability, talking about major because it's about countrywide organizations, government agencies. I'm very heartened to see organizations take upon their themselves to start with one, which is to audit the current carbon emissions throughout their whole entire operation. We're not talking about SME, we're talking about big organizations. And it takes a lot of effort to achieve that. But it's paramount because until you know what your current status is, you really don't know where you should go. So I will encourage all of you to take the effort to look at your baseline. And once you are able to do that, again, look at your current work processes, because that tells a lot in terms of where the emissions are coming from. A lot of us are willing to do the baseline and we jump straight to curtailing carbon emissions in our operations, but we're not prepared to examine our current processes. I think that's something it's important, number 2. And once you get through that, number 3 is a natural consequence. We will deal with those issues because now you have clarity. And number 4 is interesting. Again, we often think of machines, we think about hardware. And I know WorldGBC is very strong on software in terms of advocacy, in terms of changing human behavior. I hope that you can be an example for the rest of the world in terms of how you mobilize, how you kind of encourage people to behave in a way that help this cause. Finally, recycling, disassembly, reuse, recycle, upcycle. I think that's still emergent. It will take time, but if we get 1, 2, 3, 4 right, again, I think number 5 is a consequence. So that's net zero processes, and I will show you a very good example. This is an interface, very famous carpet production company. I have no interest in this company, but I'm very inspired by the founder, Ray Anderson, who was also a supporter of World Green Building Council. I think what is particularly encouraging is a founder who decided once and for all in 1994 that the company had to cut the umbilical cord to oil, and thereby fundamentally changing its entire business processes, fundamentally deciding that the priorities on the right-hand side were what they want to do to eliminate the negative impact on the environment. So the energy used now at own manufacturing site is renewable, up to 76%. That's remarkable. And 96% of reduction of market-based GHG. 50% of material in the flooring products are recycled or bio-based. I think that's a shining example of what the company does to change its processes. There will be processes that are different for green and brown company or economy. For the green one, let's do it properly from day one. For the brown one, I admit that we had to chisel away the brownness one step at a time, not an easy path. Let me just touch on quickly, beyond processes will be the environment that's closest to my practice as an architect, net zero environment. So we all know that we have to achieve a greater energy efficiency. So we want to rely heavily on solar panels and alternative to use enough energy to achieve that. And of course, behavioral change, natural ventilation to reduce the consumption of energy. But what do you do with the rest when you can't produce enough to nullify the energy consumption? We have to purchase off-site. So that is something that is a given. I work with several organizations. We all realize that at some point in time, not even a single building can renew itself completely. It has to purchase off-site or even purchase carbon credits. I think that's something that we need to debate thoroughly. I suggest even a final thought that's quite horrifying for actually developers. Is it conceivable to control development intensity by amount of energy produced or saved against the past legacy practices of basing on density, population comfort, etc.? Will we reach a day where energy production becomes part and parcel of the equation of development control? Food for thought. So here again, in Singapore, I'm working with my professors on looking at the net zero typological building to look at how best we can create a template for net zero building, especially in the tropics, even in your environment of subtropical climate. It's not entirely always easy to achieve net zero building with a certain development intensity. So we are actively working on a template, a smart AI infused template where users can work on it and yet get instant feedback as to whether the building is heading towards the net zero direction, or what are some of the calibrating factors one can introduce to reduce the carbon emissions. So not new to you, I'm quite sure you think about solarization. Can solarization be more intelligent? What about materiality? Can we have more alternative beside the usual steel and concrete? I know wood is on the agenda, but what else? Rethink how buildings are planned. We are very used to creating deep floor plate offices where deep in the core where you hardly get any daylight. And we're also very used to creating building with lots of glazing that not only allows good view, but also leakage of the air coolness. So can we think of buildings that are stratified, that has got double zoning? And of course, the rest is about water and waste management. So paradigms must change. Horizontal solarization, no matter what, is more effective. and it goes beyond the building itself to look at the urban spaces. How do we use that to supplement what building can produce? Timber, I mentioned. Rethink paradigms of live, work, and play, such as the Apple HQ. I know people don't live there, but they probably work 24 hours. This is an interesting example that's recently completed, designed by Björk Ingels and Thomas Hedderwick, the Google HQ. It's what they call a ground scraper. So we're used to skyscraper, but being a ground scraper, you naturally achieve a lot more in terms of the hugging the ground to reduce the so-called the loss of energy, as well as able to tap into the ground for more resources with maximum efficiency. So I don't think this is a perfect example for our climate, but I think it's something for us to think hard about. Now, if you can't remember all the technical parts, I would say this is, to my mind, one of the very important chart about net zero organization. I learned this during my time before I was even chairman of World Green Building Council, during one of the discussion about organizational changes. Of course, at that time, we're thinking about World Green Building Council, but I think this chart applies to every organization. Net zero push requires a change in organization. These are, again, just a very simple illustration of 5 levels of sustainability, where the responsible party at the lowest level started with volunteers until the level 5, which is organizational culture. So you can read for yourself where the different kind of influence from volunteers to department to C-suites can have on the organization. I suggest that if we are serious about sustainability here, especially all of you in the room today, you probably should be at level 4 or 5. And if you are not, I think it's good to think about how you get there, because that's the only way you can bring maximum influence to your employees and to your customers. Just some examples. I can't exactly show you company culture, but again, country culture is the same. And you do see that some of these are very, very renowned sustainable cultures in these countries. Due to time constraint, I won't go through them in detail. And some of these are not even always on our radar. For example, Costa Rica, 99% of its electricity is from renewable sources. And it is actually a very green country. I've been to the city. It's not always as green as the picture shows, but you can tell some of the ambition of the people. Now, last part, just going to go through this roadmap towards net zero. You need to have net zero people, net zero education, and net zero campaign. So World Green Building Council has succeeded in doing these things. I think we have an organization of 70 country members where I met some of the most passionate people on net zero, including Hong Kong Green Building Council. Education is paramount. You can't do net zero without education. So this must be supported by more business case and more transparent sharing. And last but not least, of course, campaigns. I'm coming to the end of my presentation, and I wanted to leave you with this message about net zero innovation. Net zero by itself is not an entirely familiar science for a lot of us. And I think we can't depend on the traditional silo knowledge about building sciences to achieve net zero. And furthermore, you need more innovations. I'm heartened to say that since net zero, or since the sustainability movement become mainstream, we start to see new urban planning, like buildings that are infused with greenery, architecture, engineering. We start to see greener transportation, hopefully aviation. Food and agriculture goes vertical, green finance, and information and communication too. I see this as a green renaissance. It is actually getting very exciting if we think about the innovation aspect, but we need a lot more. So my conclusion, are we hopeful for a net zero world? The answer must be yes. I share your enthusiasm, but like my dream says, we must take decisive actions and act while we still have time to turn the tide. So with that, I thank you very much for your kind attention, and I look forward to joining the panel discussion. Thank you very much.